Hi, I'm Alison. I'm Forage agronomist and Forage extension specialist for the LSU AgCenter. I want to talk to you a little bit today about fertilizers and forage fertilization. Um, we'll talk a little bit about plants first, thinking about that there are 16 essential elements for plant growth. Now, we don't necessarily supply all of those elements in fertilization processes, and the elements are broken down into what they call primary, secondary, and micro, and that's based on what percentage of those are in the plant. The primary elements include carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, which we don't fertilize with that. The plant gets that from the air and the soil. And then there's nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus that are primary elements. And those are the primary ones that we fertilize with. And the secondary elements being calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Now, magnesium and calcium, we usually correct any problems by using lime. In sulfur now, there are some cases where we have some deficiencies, primarily on sandy type soils. Um, but most of our nitrogen fertilizers now contain some sulfur, so we get that in the fertilizer also. And then there's 7 micronutrients that we rarely have an effect of or use in fertilization. It's very rare situations where we have a deficiency in the micronutrients and things. So we're going to talk mostly about the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, and that's what we kind of use to in fertilization to correct. Now, if you look at a plant and break down the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels, you typically a kind of general ratio is like a 5-1-4. Basically, that's saying for every pound of phosphorus that's in a plant, there's 5 pounds of nitrogen and 4 pounds of potassium. So with that, I get questions occasionally that people talk about how much of triple 13 should I add to my hay field or my pasture or something. And really, triple 13 being a balanced fertilizer as it is, it's 13% nitrogen, 13% phosphorus, 13% potassium or potash, is not really in a good ratio for what the plant needs are. So that's not necessarily a real good fertilizer to choose. We'll talk some, let me talk about the fertilizers in particular here. Um, you have triple superphosphate or diammonium phosphate if you're looking for a phosphate fertilizer. Both of those fertilizers have 46% phosphate in there, meaning for every 100 pounds you'll get 46 pounds of phosphate. Now the diammonium phosphate or DAP, which is fairly common as a phosphate fertilizer, also has 18% nitrogen. So if you are needing to fertilize with phosphate fertilizer, and you look at and they have triple super and diammonium phosphate or DAP at equivalent prices, you'd want to pick the DAP because you're getting some nitrogen with that. Now, in almost all situations, the phosphate fertilizer that is used is muriate of potash, which is 0060, meaning that it has 60 pounds of potash for every 100 pounds of fertilizer, or 60% potash fertilizer. And then we have the nitrogen. And I guess I missed a little point there just to point out. Fertilizers are rated basically on 3 numbers. They'll give you a series of numbers just like triple 13. That's 13, 13, 13. And that is the nitrogen, phosphate, and potash concentration in that fertilizer. So now we're getting to the nitrogen fertilizers. Most everything now has gone to urea. Used to, Ammonium nitrate was the most popular of the fertilizers used in hay fields and pastures, but we don't very much use that anymore. It's really not available much anymore, and that's why. So most of the nitrogen fertilizers now are either urea or some derivative or mixture with urea. Now urea has 46% nitrogen in it, so if you're looking to fertilize about 50 pounds per acre, you could put about 110 pounds or so of urea per acre, and you'd get that 50 pound or close to the 50 pound rate of nitrogen applied out there. Now, most of the others that we're using, we have a fertilizer. It's called UAS. I see on bags, and it's a trilled or granular fertilizer. It's 33% nitrogen, which a lot of times gets confused with ammonium nitrate, which was 34% nitrogen. But actually, this is a blend of ammonium sulfate and urea. So you also get 12% sulfur with this. 33% nitrogen, 12% sulfur. Uh, I mentioned ammonium sulfate. We are using that some in pastures now, or that's a nitrogen fertilizer that gets used. That one is 210024, which is 21% nitrogen, 24% sulfur. And that's why most of our nitrogen fertilizers now have some sulfur in it, because a lot of them are blends of urea and ammonium sulfate. So, and also we have the liquid fertilizers, and liquid fertilizers are good on pastures and work fine on forage crops and that sort of thing. Typically around here, there may be some other percentages that are around. The one that's most common right now is a 30-0-0-2, and that is a blend of urea and ammonium sulfate again, but it's in a liquid form. It also contains 12% sulfur with that. So, and you have what used to be always referred to as the UAN fertilizers, which was a urea ammonium nitrate blends. They're not as common now, again, because ammonium nitrate is not a preferred nitrogen source, or it is a preferred nitrogen source, but it is very regulated now in use, so it's typically not found in fertilizers. But the UAN was usually around here was 32% nitrogen. Didn't have any sulfur because it was just urea and ammonium nitrate. Now, when you get ready to fertilize, I want to stress that the best thing to base it on is a soil test. I mean, that gives you the best idea of what you need to add. But without a soil test, remember that typically sort of an idea of what the plant nutrient ratio is 5:1 to 4 in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium or potash. So you would want a fertilizer that would somewhat mimic those numbers. And you can get this pretty easy by blending these fertilizers. And you go to any of these fertilizer dealers and they can blend that. And you know, so you can use urea, uh, triple super phosphate, or muriate of potash. And they can blend those together to give you that ratio of 5:1:4. And then you just apply that, whatever that works out to be, based on, typically it's based on how much nitrogen you want to apply, is what you're going to base fertilization on. But your soil test will tell you how much P and K that you need, and you can put that in a blend also and put it out there. But you can blend all three, and that works fine. All right, I want to talk a little bit about the economics on fertilizers and things, and thinking about, and primarily this is going to be with the nitrogens, because there are several of those out there. Now, the potash, you only have one choice. Phosphate, you have two. They both are the same as far as phosphate. One contains some nitrogen, so if they're similar in price, you ought to pick the one with nitrogen. But the nitrogen fertilizers, since there's several out there to pick from, we'll talk some about that. If you consider that urea is 46% nitrogen, and let's say it costs $400 a ton, just for a figure to throw out there. Now that ton contains 900 pounds or 920 pounds of nitrogen in it. So compare that to, say, ammonium sulfate, which is 21% nitrogen. If you have a ton of that, you're only looking at 420 pounds of nitrogen out there. So the price of ammonium sulfate would have to be less, I think, about $195 a ton for you to get the same amount of nitrogen as if you bought a ton, so that you could buy enough of that ammonium sulfate to equal the amount of nitrogen that you get in the urea. So just the price of a fertilizer, because one's 400 and one's 300, doesn't necessarily mean that the $300 fertilizer is less expensive, because it may not have as much nutrient there. If you're using a liquid fertilizer, the 30-002, if urea was about $400 a ton, that fertilizer would need to be about $260 a ton, so that you could get the same amount of nitrogen at the same money. So the main thing is, don't look at the price of the fertilizer. Look at the price per pound of nutrient that you're trying to get applied there. And obviously, most of you realize there are some issues with using urea, and we've talked some about these before. But there are ways to overcome those issues and things. If you're using urea fertilizer, and almost every one of these has urea in it and things, is you would prefer to be right before a rain, so that the water will incorporate it in the soil, and then you really won't lose any of that nitrogen at all. There are some products that you can put on that delay the reaction with urea, and minimize the risk that you have of volatilization and that sort of thing. But that's really for another session, or kind of talking about what urea goes through and how to avoid those things, because there's several little things to do there. But with that, I do appreciate your attention, and you can contact me at the LSU AgCenter. I'm at the Northeast Region office there, or any of the extension agents in your parish you can contact, and I can get information to them if they need that. So I appreciate your attention. Thanks.